have to admit this. I mean, we sent Jakari Jackson and others out there last year. We should send them again to cover the water shortage and the radiate. And we would go up to the water, and it'd be 120 times what they say safe here, and 50 times here, and 30 times there. And then they sent government crews out, and we were in the San Francisco Chronicle, you name it, a week later going, well, these conspiracy theorists said there was higher radiation. And they're right, but it's not a problem, kooks. Not a problem, just 120 times, you know, the safe level. What? And they go, you don't know how to run those field meters. Those aren't Geiger counters. Same difference. Didn't matter. The point was it was massively increased. But you're not an expert. Well, we can go buy a calibrated machine, 3 of them, different brands. They showed the same thing. A lady catches a fish, it's just off the chart, you know, 200 times or something. All right, let's go to our guest, Jerry Peterman. And I've had medical doctors, radiologists on so many, but he's the expert because he talks to all of them. FukushimaUpdateReport.com is probably the leading site, clearinghouse of real information to break this down. He's an engineer in TV and radio, and he also has the first microcomputer-powered micro. He's just a very interesting engineer. I'm not going to get into all of it. And he works with production, scientific advances, and such other varied disciplines as communication, transportation, alternative fuels, environmental waste disposal, satellite-delivered electronic store shelf advertising, electrical power generation, anti-aging, food and science, wind turbine technologies, FukushimaUpdateReport.com. And he's got the people on the ground in California, people on the ground in Japan, and he joins us now. You heard my little intro, sir, but what do you make of the media and the government admitting but saying it's the first time radiation has reached when they know that's not the case? And what are the real levels that we're seeing? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alex. I think the thing that's most obvious is this is very similar to Brave New World, where someone simply goes in and rewrites the news. That's what they're doing, is just, oh, that's not what we said, we're rewriting it. We're looking at off the coast of California and the rate of 7 becquerels of radiation per cubic meter of seawater, and that's quite a bit. It's not going to probably give you cancer immediately, but over a long period of time, you don't want to be eating fish in that condition. You just don't. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. It raised, when they first started detecting it in the air in April or May of 2011, they began to reduce or increase the amount that was acceptable. The U.S. Nuclear Agency began to increase that. So, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Break down your research, because it's so wide and so huge. What are the real experts saying?
Real experts saying we're in a world of hurt. We have something that is going to be around for the next several hundred generations. We're dealing with a runaway situation that no one knows how to deal with. I've written up something called Insane Things About Fukushima. And initially, everybody thought, oh, well, we'll have this contained in a year or two. We'll go in and contain the material and all this. And, oh, yeah, it's probably still in the containment vessel, all this different core material they call corium. It's a mixture of all the radionuclides in the plant. And truth of the matter is, nobody ever went into this thing and took a look at it. And now it's been 4 years since this, quote, accident. And now what? We have a situation where TEPCO's plant chief just in March made the statement that it's going to be a 200-year wait before we have technology that even begins to know what to do with this thing. We have no viable method to deal with it. And there's so many uncertainties. We just really consider the problems insurmountable. And this could be possibly the worst possible result. Centuries could pass. One another plant executive said centuries may pass before humans find a way to deal with these molten cores. We have no idea what to do. You see, the problem they're admitting now, after 4 years, the technology doesn't exist to deal with this. And so I was always a little bit in the dark as to what are we dealing with? How much material are we dealing with, and what is it? And we found that the reports now indicate that at least 5% of this is plutonium activated as MOX fuel. And MOX fuel was, some people say, illegally being used in there.
And that was the MOX-3 reactor that had the big mushroom cloud explosion. I was no engineer, but I looked at the online release designs and clearly said those are the rods being shot up through the air. And a year later, they admitted that they shot up to 2 miles away, but the government here and there covered it up. And so that's my big question. And before we walk through all this with the head of one of the leading organizations that's engaged in massive research, FukushimaUpdateReport.com, Jerry Peterman, why do the elites not seem to care? Why are they building more reactors? Why are they letting old ones rot and loading more fuel into them? I mean, it's almost like they want to kill everybody. I mean, what is wrong with the establishment?
I think we've, by the way, take a look at that very carefully. What is the color of hydrogen when it burns? Hydrogen is clear. It does not produce a yellow flash. The only thing that does produce a yellow flash in that kind of environment is some kind of nuclear conflagration.
And that's what Dr. Busby and other nuclear physicists have said here. And then, sure enough, universities outside of the government did the isotope test and said, yes, we show that fission occurred, correct?
That's correct. And now we have people, after we've got the admission that there was fission, now they're beginning to look, well, if there was fission, I'll bet we had some neutron radiation released. Oh, but we couldn't have had that because there was no fission. Well, we had fission. Okay, well, let's look for it. Well, they're finding that their estimate was 13 billion times lower than was actually released. In other words, there is 13 billion times more neutron radiation that's been released. And the significant part of that is that every particle of the wastewater that's stored on site has been subjected to neutron activation. And neutron activation is an interesting process. The radiation doesn't just go through the water. Every time a neutron hits a particle, let's say it's magnesium floating in the seawater, or iron, or copper, or whatever.
It's creating radioactive water.
Everything that it touches, a neutron touches, becomes radioactive. So you have got 144 million gallons of water stored on site, where every particle inside those containment vessels are radioactive.
And what is the half-life if this is plutonium radiation? I mean, we're not talking about cesium or something that breaks down in a few months, are we?
No, that's the neat thing about, and being facetious, the neat thing about nuclear power plants, they keep on giving. You can get the benefits of the pollution for a half-life of uranium is 4.2 billion years. So every time we create a nuclear power plant, we're creating a system that's going to produce waste that is going to last 4.2 billion years. Oh, that's the half-life. That means if it was 100 then, just using a number, in 4.2 billion years, it's going to be 50. So it
would take 8 billion plus years to become non-radioactive.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be beyond the end of the universe.
So what is the nuclear industry thinking? Because when I was a kid and everything, I bought into the propaganda. Hey, don't listen to the commies. Nuclear power is great. But then Russia has them melting down, blowing up, Chernobyl, the cancers increase, all these leaking reactors. CBS News says 75% are leaking. We have news articles from the Atomic Energy Agency, as you know, saying 90+% are leaking. It's like they had problems before, but suddenly it seems like the establishment thinks it's good. I mean, are they space aliens that want to make the Earth radioactive? Because I'm trying to be logical here.
I don't think you're too far off. I'm not saying they're space aliens, but I will say something's not right. These people are certifiable. If you've got a car that's smoking going down the road, you'd think that probably at some point it's going to stop, and it throws out pollution all the time. You get these things leaking. The common sense thing to do is fix them and keep going if you're going to be in that industry.
Exactly. And of course, I don't think it's aliens either. I'm just saying they're so destructive that if they're not really aliens that want to live in a radioactive environment, this doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. You got to consider the premise of producing waste that lasts 4.5 billion years or 4.2 billion years just to create power for today. That really doesn't make sense either, but who's counting?
But I mean, if they could contain it even somewhat safely, but they just, 91% of the plants are leaking, and it's getting worse, these plants are supposed to stay open 30 years. A lot of them are now into their 40th plus year. And, of course, for folks that don't know, the radiation just eats these plants. They're falling apart. Whistleblower. I mean, in the old days, they would poison plant workers if they warned the public about a small leak. Nowadays, they just go, hey, we don't care.
We don't care. Now, I'll ask you a question. I bet you know this from your research. Where is the fuel stored, since we don't use Yucca Flats? Where is the fuel stored in the United States for reactors that spent fuel?
They're generally stored, I think, about 85% of the time, last time I saw, at the reactor sites.
Yes. And I can tell you for absolute certain that most reactors have more fuel stored at their locations than Fukushima had stored in their situations. Now, the chance of us having some kind of tsunami is probably not going to happen. But then again, we have several reactors in the Ohio Basin and out on California fault lines that are sitting on top of earthquake fault zones, which that took a lot of common sense to do.
I was going to ask you again. I've seen the global maps of where they store the stuff, whether it's the U.S., Japan, or even, well, they only seem to want to store them on earthquake lines. Is that a fun joke, or what's that?
I have no idea, but you have to wonder where it's stored now. We've dumped 40,000 tons of nuclear material, depleted uranium, and that term is not accurate. It's still 30% radioactive. We dumped that on Iraq and Afghanistan.
And don't forget the Navy, under orders for 30 years, dumped it all off the U.S. coast, both east and west.
Yeah, I don't think you have too much problem if you're down 10 or 15,000 feet in the ocean at the bottom. It's going to sit there for a while. But that really wasn't very bright either.
I shouldn't laugh. This is just crazy.
I mean, what can you do if you don't laugh in irony? What are you going to do? Cry about it? I mean, for God's sake, this is end of the world scenario for this thing. Alex, I did not know what amount of material we were dealing with in the molten cores. Let me tell you the size of a single molten core of the three. Those things are 30 to 47 feet across and 2 stories deep underneath each one of these. We're talking about something that is burning at 3,500 degrees, and it is the size of a small building. This is all one lump.
And update me on the specifics, because I saw the articles the last few months. They've been covering up leaks for 10 months. They say it's worse than ever at Fukushima.
Absolutely, it's worse than anything. And when you consider all 3 of these reactors, you're dealing with over 600,000 pounds of this material. And people say, well, that's a lot of pounds. I can't wrap my head around it. Okay, go out in a Walmart parking lot or someplace and count 190 cars, and that's the amount of material that you have melted down, the equivalent of 190 automobiles melted down.
Because they were storing it right on top of the reactors. Jerry Peterman, FukushimaUpdateReport.com is our guest. We're going to get into where this crisis is going and the radiation levels rising in the U.S.
We're on the